Tomorrow's People, the podcast brought to you by Personio and me, Perry Timms. Everything starts with people, and everything includes a system. We're about to explore systems with esteemed OD practitioner Paul Taylor-Pitt, whose PhD in research into how we can create more dynamic conditions for work will help us see what tomorrow's work will look like for tomorrow's people. Welcome to Tomorrow's People podcast, Paul Taylor-Pitt.
It's really great to be here.
Oh,
I'm so happy to be here, Perry. Thank you for having me.
And we've known each other for a long time and geeked out many an hour about the world of work, OD, and just what makes thriving and lovely workplaces come to life. So, and I know you are now 15 months, because you said earlier, 15 months into being Paul Taylor-Pitt independent professional.
Director of consulting practice.
Nice.
I have to really think about how I introduce myself, because part of me just wants to say, oh, I'm just 5'6" Sagittarian or whatever, blue eyes. It doesn't really matter. But people don't hire me for that.
No.
So I needed to think of a better way of describing it. So I'm a director of a consulting practice.
Nice. And of course, your backstory is a legendary one when it comes to OD. And I've often described you as this human Wikipedia, because you can just reel out these theories and pieces of research and so on and so forth. Is OD still a big part of what you're doing?
Yes. And I think it always was. Just maybe in ways that even I didn't realise. Like I feel like I'm already going to dive into Wikipedia. Michael Polanyi, whose work I really like, often says, we know more than we can say. And I think it's like that with a lot of OD folk. We sometimes find our way into it because we're really good at relationships, or we're really good at systems.
Yeah.
And that was certainly how I came into it. My background was always in something and development, training and development, learning and development, workforce development, professional development.
Yeah.
And then when I came into OD, I kind of went, this explains it.
Yeah.
This makes sense. It just felt like home.
Yeah.
So it's always been part of it. I hope it always is part of it. And I think what I'm also discovering is that there are lots of other things.
Yeah.
Lots of other things to explore, which I'm loving.
Nice. And would you say these 15 months of you being a freer and liberated spirit has sort of opened up more learning to you and different adjacent kind of things?
I think it would be hard not to.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's always been easy learning. I think I've had to learn or unlearn a lot, actually. I think I was quite institutionalized from being in large organizations for nearly 3 decades. And I'm still unlearning stuff. There are moments where I still go, I should take a day off. Who should I ask? And then I go, no one.
Exactly.
I can just do it.
Yeah.
So I think I'm still unlearning, and I'm still learning. I'm doing some really interesting work with people I would never have come across before, and other bits of work I didn't think I would ever be asked to do.
Yeah.
So that first year was really a bit of an experiment, just to see what do people think I'm here for?
Yeah.
So I didn't really interfere with it very much. I kind of just left it to see what came to me.
Yeah.
And I was very happy with what did. And moving into the second year, I wanted to be more deliberate.
Yeah.
And think about actually what do people think I'm here for, and also what difference do I want to make in a more proactive way.
Yeah. And you had this theme of postcards from the edge that sort of narrated your way through some of that early journey, which I found really stimulating to just see where is he at now.
So did I.
Yeah.
I think it was a way of dealing with my loneliness, which is an interesting thing, because I think in a way that's how I came to start do OD, which is, I guess, if people know me, that's probably what they know me for. That came from a place of being quite an isolated practitioner. And back in 2012, when that happened, the world was really different for OD. I used to be quite envious of my HR colleagues because they had lots of networks and people wanting to take them out for breakfast. And then I would put my OD hat back on and everyone vanished. So Do OD really came from a place of me thinking, it can't just be me or other people feeling like this, which they were. So that was a bit of an antidote to loneliness. And I think Postcards from the Edge of Employment, when I started writing those, was really a way of just, I saw them as like little messages in a bottle that I just threw out into the world that were mostly for me. But if they resonated, then it was always interesting that someone else would say, oh, I felt like this.
Yeah.
And the themes were around, not being sure that I deserved this freedom, or not knowing how to do it, or what it's like when I make a mistake.
Yeah.
How to talk about myself. I was kind of working out loud, and often people would reply and say, yeah, I've been there. Try this. So it was fantastic.
Nice.
I think it's maybe we were saying earlier about being two only childs.
Yes.
And I've never had a problem with that. But I also think some of my work is always about connections.
Yeah.
Being perfectly fine on my own.
Yeah.
And wanting to belong.
Yeah. And belonging is a massive kind of stimulus for me in seeing how people come alive and find who they are, and so on and so forth. And so I guess my mind goes to the kind of work that you're doing now and the sort of focus that is coming from that. What's kind of really occupying you at the moment?
Do you know, it's quite diffuse actually at the moment, which I'm both loving and also really trying to work out what I'm here to do.
Yep.
What is my purpose?
Yep.
So most of my work is still in the space of OD consulting, and most of that is around strategy, culture, teams.
Yeah.
I also mentor people, I coach people. I work with a coaching school to train other people as coaches. I write, I host a couple of podcasts. There's all of these things that I have this freedom to do. And I kind of don't want to not do something because I think I can't. I'd rather give it a try and then maybe just work out what works and what doesn't.
So lots of experimentation.
Yeah. I feel like I'm just living life as a bit of an inquiry.
Nice.
Into what is it that I'm meant to do with myself.
And an expression of that will find itself in words you use and things that capture your interest, and interesting that the unlearning thing is still a part of it. And I guess there are still lots of new frontiers and new things coming to you that you are topping up your learning with. And there is something about OD practitioners that I know of, and I feel very proud to say that I consider myself part of that sort of fraternity, that curiosity just seems to constantly roll and never gets in the way and just always creates a stimulus. Do you think that's still a real trademark of OD that people know, or perhaps it's underappreciated, or this curiosity sort of pull? And
I think it's at the heart of it, and I'm seeing less tolerance for it. I see organizations who want immediate change and instant solutions and the answer. And that's fine, because that's where they are. I think one of the gifts that we have in OD is to be able to pause that process, or maybe slow it down, and to be curious and to ask some questions. And I always think of it as a success if someone says to me, oh, I've never thought about it like that before. I'm not telling them what to think. I'm just offering them maybe different ways of looking at something. And I think it's getting harder to do that in a world where time is so squeezed and answers are sought and certainty is seen as so available, even though it's not.
There may be some illusionary thinking about that, or almost folly-like thinking and so on, but it can bizarrely feel quite comforting for people.
Oh, it's really seductive.
Yeah.
I think that's why people like artificial intelligence. Because it sounds so sure of itself. It's like it knows stuff and it says this is it. And we go, oh, wow, something knows something. Whereas I think as a good OD practitioner, I would like to think that I can hold a space for more than one point of view and some ambiguity and some uncertainty. Because if we knew the answers to everything, we would just get on and do it. And how boring would that be?
Exactly. And the world, thankfully, conspires against that possibility, doesn't it? By just as you think you're on top of something, it's like, ha, 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 and it just completely throws new light in there. And you're like, oh, didn't think that.
And yet, personally, I hate that. Awful. I
Yeah.
hear, and I've said it myself, OD practitioners saying, oh, we're such disruptors. And then I think, oh, please don't.
I know.
I don't like disruption. Thanks very much. I just want everything to be smooth.
Well, there is that negative connotation to disruption, isn't there? Which is like, the instability and the vulnerability that people kind of go, well, I didn't mean that kind of disruption. It's like, what did you mean then? It's like something that's a bit more bountiful and vibrant. It's like, maybe you can't have one without the other. And it's a necessary pain almost.
Yeah.
And do you find that the work you're doing and in the past, there was a lot of pain. There were painful things going on, both in a people sense and in a performance sense or a potential sense. And you were having to kind of absorb that pain in order to understand it, in order to try and help fix what's going on.
So a couple of responses to that. I don't think I absorbed it.
Right.
And that came from years and years ago, someone telling me, and I wish I could remember who it was, because I feel a bit mean for not crediting them. But they described the difference between sympathy, apathy, and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, if you're walking along the river and you see someone drowning, apathy is that you just go, oh, good luck, and you walk, you carry on. Sympathy is when you dive in to save them and you both drown. And empathy is where you keep one foot on the bank and you reach in and pull them out.
Yeah.
And I think that's the space of OD, is to be in a place where I can go, oh, I get a sense, I can maybe get my toes wet, maybe experience a bit of what it's like. But I'm not diving in to save them and I'm not walking past to ignore them. So I don't think I absorbed that pain.
Right.
I think pain is a really interesting choice of words. And it was, funnily enough, almost the topic of my doctorate. Almost.
Wow.
I know. And it still lurks somewhere. I'm actually just about to possibly do a bit of research around what we're calling workplace whiplash, which is this idea of the organization as a body and what happens when sudden change happens. And that's partly a hangover from that idea of looking at pain, because I think pain is fascinating. I remember seeing a physio once when I was marathon training.
Yep.
And I kept saying, oh, it's such pain in my legs. And she said, yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because your brain is perceiving pain, but it's not feeling it. It's coming from somewhere else. And I thought that was such an interesting model for organizations, that people in organizations will be experiencing discomfort or pain, but the exec team often don't feel it.
Yeah.
They might hear about it, but they don't feel it.
Yeah.
And then there's other things like referred pain, where it comes from somewhere else, or there's phantom pain when a piece of an organization floats off. I just think it's such an interesting concept to think about to frame organizational life.
Yep.
So I'm still I'm holding that. I didn't quite let go, but it didn't quite make it into the final thing.
How interesting. And the work that you did in your doctorate, are you seeing the sort of patterns and connections from what interested you enough to do that to how you then invoke that into practice and advice and support? Yeah, so that's still strong.
I feel like it's only now becoming relevant, like 6 years later.
Wow.
Which I think is fascinating. But I also think the NHS is such a wonderful organisation and gets such a lot of negative stuff thrown at it. And yet in so many ways, it's really pushing the boundaries, particularly around OD and organisations. So my doctorate was around how do you do OD in multiple organisations that are working together as a system when they've always had to work individually in the past. And what does an OD practitioner need to be or do to work in that systemic way? And so I worked with an amazing group of 14 OD practitioners. We did it as a cooperative inquiry.
Nice.
And our work was really, initially it was it was almost quite binary. I was thinking, we need to move from diagnostic to dialogic OD. That will solve everything.
Yeah.
And actually what we came up with was that there was a third category that we created called dynamic OD, which was moving from the planned to the spontaneous to the improvised.
Yeah.
And that was in response to the NHS reorganising, working in systems.
Yeah.
And in the last year, I've worked in universities who are moving towards group models.
Right.
I've worked with charities who are working towards partnership models.
Right.
I've worked with other organizations who are demerging.
Yeah.
And so there's all of these conversations about what's it like to do something individually and collectively.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's actually coming full circle almost, that I'm now starting to put it into practice in a way that, sadly, the pandemic happened and we had to go, okay, all hands on deck.
Yeah.
I feel like now there's a time to maybe just bring it out again and breathe some life into it again.
It's a lovely way to think about it, actually, to give it that dynamic kind of tag, because I'm sensing there are some uncertainties and some intensities and complexities that people are like, I really don't know what I'm doing now. I thought it might snap back, but actually, even though I feel like I'm trying to resurrect 2019 because we've gone through what we've gone through, that's just not right.
No. And you can't ever go back.
No.
You can never go backwards. No. You can't unevolve. And I think, the research that we were doing was saying there's always a place for like traditional diagnostic OD.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We based it on a model of triangulating complexity theory and systems thinking.
Yeah.
And then in between that space, there was this idea of, well, depending on how complex the issue is and at what level of system, that might encourage us to think about what kind of OD intervention.
Yeah.
So diagnostic OD, fantastic, really good, simple problem, simple solution. Dialogic OD is great when you're working in a more complicated space and you need to come together and paddle quite quickly. And then we found this other space, which was kind of in the space of complexity and almost chaos, which is, we don't know what we don't know. And as OD practitioners, we don't necessarily have the tools or the interventions. So all we have is us. We just have whatever we bring into a room. And I loved the idea that that was something emergent. I don't think it's anything new.
No.
But I think there's something emergent in the space which says there's more than just what's out there. And if I can walk into a room, throw out the agenda and just be of use. To me, that's what dynamic OD is about. It's improvisational, it's experimental, it's relational, all of those things.
It feels very active as well, doesn't it? As in there are lots of activities and thoughts that are not just contemplative. They're very purposeful and directional.
Yeah, and almost active in a less is more way. The more I do this work, the less I try to do.
I know what you mean.
From my old career. Back in the day. My old work of standing at the front and talking. For me now, it's much more about sitting at the back and listening.
Yeah, and I often look at things like the World Economic Forum's, these are the projected capabilities for the future. And I'm always left with a sense of lacking. And I think until you just started to talk to me, I know why now, because they label critical thinking, they go, critical thinking is what we need. And I'm sort of going, where's the sensing in that? It's almost like, feels so very head. Where's the spirit and the soul coming from? And I'm not seeing it there. So, but what you've described feels quite soulful, quite deep. And almost a philosophy, but actually turned into practicalities as well.
And I think in organisations, we sometimes have to dehumanise people to be able to sleep at night.
Right.
And I think if we really believe that people are whole and they have souls and they are emotional beings, we have to treat them differently. I think it's kind of easy to just talk about human resources and numbers or job titles or grades. It's much more difficult and much more vital, I think, that we see people as people. And yet that means that maybe we can't do some of the things that we want to do because we live in this capitalist world.
And what you also described about we can't bring the tools out yet because we don't quite know what we need in order to get the right tool is a challenge I'm suspecting board and execs are all over the place, but possibly in denial about. And it's like, how do we get that conversation and that mindset and that sensing into that space? Because they are used to dealing with short, pithy PowerPoint decks or dashboards. And it's almost like that's the sort of mission control narrative data, but not the feel and the real calling behind it. So would you say there's something in your work that that lends itself really nicely to that sort of environment where you're almost trying to reconnect executives with like, what are we all about? Why are we even here? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was looking for a coaching supervisor recently, and I approached someone and she said, I think I'd like to work with you because you seem really human. And I thought, that's a nice compliment.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
Yeah.
glad that someone noticed.
Yeah.
And I think there is something about me individually and OD people collectively, which is just this humanity. I remember one of my first OD assignments when I was working with an organisation that was being abolished. And I met with the chief exec. We were in her office. She was making me a coffee. And I said to her, how are you doing? And she stopped and she went, I can't remember the last time anyone's asked me that.
Oh.
And she'd been doing that work for over a year.
Yeah.
And so we sat and we just talked about how she was doing. And it seemed like such an obvious thing to me. And so I think I always try to have, firstly, compassion for execs who are doing the best they can. And often no one's saying to them, how are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if we don't show compassion and humanity to those people, we can't expect them to show it to others. And yet this busyness, this intensity, it squeezes out time to think.
Doesn't it?
And I think when you squeeze out time to think, work becomes transactional.
Yeah.
So you only ask for something when you need something.
Yeah.
You don't just hang out with people. And I think when we stop just hanging out with people, we lose curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think when we lose curiosity, you lose empathy.
Yeah.
And so you do just become someone who's getting in my way.
Yeah.
Because you didn't reply to that email. Rather than me just calling you up and going, what's going on in your life at the moment? Is there anything I can help with? God. It becomes something where, you know, you get that email from someone and you go, oh, what do they want now?
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, nice, they're getting in touch.
What a lovely way you did that little weave then, by the way. And then to connect it to an everydayness thing, right?
Right.
Because I think this everydayness, we get caught up in that all the time. And I see it when I go into organizations that have beautiful purpose-led ways and people who are absolutely commercially oriented, right? Yet this, what do they want? This interference, this what now, is almost like, when did that overtake us? When did that consume us so much that we don't stop and go, they must be up to something important because they want something from me. We've just completely lost that, haven't we? How odd. And there's something about OD's almost alchemy that I'm starting to sort of feel now, which is it so goes beyond structure, flow, stratification and all that kind of stuff into the more ethereal, feeling, emotive based things.
I think it's always both and. I mean, I think you know, alchemy, although I love alchemy, I have lots of alchemical tattoos all over me because I love it. I also know that OD is based in behavioral science and it's really robust with data and analysis. I think the difference is that I say we as if I'm speaking above everyone. What I like to believe is that if I look at a spreadsheet, there's a story behind every cell. And the numbers are just as important as the story. They're equally important as each other. I think maybe in OD, we just have an opportunity to give people more space to express the emotional aspects of work. And maybe sometimes too much. Maybe sometimes to our, you know, I've worked with people who've said to me very clearly up front, I'm not doing this pink and fluffy stuff. And I think, oh, that's interesting. What happened? You know, there's something in there that makes me think they've had a really bad experience. And also I think, well, what's wrong with pink and fluffy? But there's always a balance to me that if OD is not in service of the organization's strategy, we shouldn't be doing it. We can be doing lots of really good stuff for people and making it a really good place to be. But if that then doesn't change something, then we're we're not doing it right.
And there's something in that you've made me go to. But before I come on to that, I love the fact that you reminded us of the word cell in a spreadsheet, almost like saying it's a kind of DNA bit. There's stuff that goes beyond that. It was a really nice thing you did.
I was thinking prison.
No, but it's got all sorts of connotations. But to your point,
yours
then,
is nicer.
Thank you. To your point then on the kind of systems and the play and the energy and the emotion and so on, there's something about that strategy as being almost like this is what's calling it into action, almost like perhaps the spell. And then the magic needs to happen when you go, but is that spell for good? And it's not my judgment of good, it's is there a sense of good that comes from this? Because if that strategy isn't for good, I see it as my role to go, well, I'll take it to the point where I know I can then go back and go, so what I think you really mean is this. Because I think there's so many well-intended versions of strategy that when you execute, then you're like, oh, what happened there? Not quite the outcome we wanted. And it's almost like there were signals along the way.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost our duty to go, I get what you want to do here, but let's look at what this is telling us now.
Yeah.
I really feel that. And I wonder whether organizations, people, leaders, whatever, are responsive, receptive, and really want that, or whether they go, there's a strategy, get on with it.
I mean, I always go back to Nancy Klein. She does the most amazing work on creating thinking spaces. And I remember seeing her teach one day. And she said, we say in organizations that we want people to think for themselves, but we don't mean it. And that really stuck with me because I do believe we do want people to think for themselves and we should mean it.
Yeah.
And so if we're noticing those signals, if we're, as OD people, we're often kind of radars to stuff that's just either unnoticeable to others or it's just so common that they've stopped seeing it. If we can just notice it, I don't think it's up to us to make sense of it. I think it's about saying, oh, did you notice that too?
Yeah.
Have you noticed it before?
Yeah.
Is that unusual? Is it helpful?
Yeah.
Is it getting in the way? And then helping people make sense of it. One of my favorite ways of describing like a developed organization is one that can talk to itself about itself.
Yeah.
It's not what I can say about it. It's how can the organization connect more of itself to itself so that it can talk about itself.
Yeah, I like that phrase. And the way to perceive an organization, not just as a collection of like brand and building and all that kind of stuff, but as a thing with a spirit, really does talk to me. And that's, I think, some of the thinking behind people like Frederick Laloux's work in reinventing organizations, where it's like, it has an evolutionary purpose and it is a thing that is in pursuit of that. I really like that.
Yeah.
That's perhaps the most real you could make an organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because organizations are part of society. They're not apart from it. They're not something separate to society. And so I like to think, and I hope that if we can make organizations better, then we make society better. If we can help people in organizations listen to each other more effectively, then we can help society listen to itself more effectively. I don't believe that you turn into a different person when you walk into an organization, no matter how much we're forced into that sometimes. And when you leave, you don't leave it all behind. Organizations are part of the fabric of society. And if we can make them just a little bit more effective, then we're making society just a little bit more effective.
Very good point about it. Doing good and being part of something, like you say, that's, again, interconnected in a complex system. So love what you did there. And I suppose there is something, again, about the practice field of OD having a sense of the heartbeat of it. And then, like you say, bringing those things to attention. And I do see and pick up a lot more we are listening kind of messages from execs on behalf of the organization. We want to listen. And you're right, Nancy Klein's declaration that, like, well, just because you say it doesn't mean you want it. Because then when you get back stuff and you don't like it, you're like, oh, I didn't mean like that. Or, oh, that's a bit hard. Let's push that aside for something.
Yeah.
But it feels vital that there is this listening element to it. And I'm just wondering how you've seen it, or perhaps how you've been very deliberate about bringing it both to people's attention and then creating the systems, the habits, the channels, the methods to do that and do something with that.
So a couple of people, I feel like this is like a hall of fame of all the people who've influenced me, which I love because it's making me remember them. So a colleague of mine, Paula, in the past used to say, I've got 2 ears and 1 mouth and I should use them in that proportion, which really stuck with me. And then my friend Vilma, who got rid of "you said, we did" in their organisation, because she said all it does is it makes us helpless. And those two things, I think, have really stuck with me because everyone should be listening to everyone. This isn't just about execs listening to staff. It's about staff listening to each other. It's about staff listening to execs. It's about everyone. And the more that we build this culture of like, tell us what we're doing wrong and we'll fix it, it becomes really disempowering. So I think for me, it's about how do we give everyone space to listen to each other and respond to that and build this collective sense of responsibility. You know, we're all accountable for it. We're all the culture of the organization. Everything I say, everything I do is my organizational culture. It doesn't happen over there. So what can we do together to make sure that if someone isn't feeling listened to, that we can bring them into the conversation or go to them and then take away this idea that you've got to fill in something in a suggestion box and then it will magically be fixed. Because it's not, we're not writing a letter to Santa.
No. Great metaphor, that, because that's what we've effectively delivered, haven't we? Some kind of intervention that perhaps appeases us, that it captures. But I think you're right. It is almost like if we take the organisation aside and think about it as a community, we would find a way, wouldn't we? And we would surface things that were dangerous or opportunities. And we would find a way. So for then people to kind of go, oh, you've got to have an intervention, it's almost like, well, hang on a minute, maybe not. Actually.
Yeah. And I love that idea, actually, of an organisation as community. I think that's really powerful because I've heard very recently organisations saying, but we're a family. I kind of go, ooh, no, families are weird. Community, I think, is really beautiful because people have different roles to play in a community. And some people volunteer to do extra. Some people do nothing. Some people just look great. Other people are really productive. I love the idea that an organisation could be a microcosm of a wider community.
And therefore design becomes something which is co-created, but also there are people who can do the hang on, I've spotted, like you said, and almost be like a bit more shamanistic about it almost than purely mechanical, because I think so many things are of our spirit and kind of capture an essence. And I often say to people, what's the vibe here, I say. And people look at me and go, what do you mean the vibe? I'm like, you know, the noise, the temperature, the flow. And I don't mean in the physical sense. It's like, how does it feel here? So there is a vibe. And that vibe has a palpability to it. You can walk into a place and you pick up a vibe, don't you?
Yeah.
As in a place of work.
Yeah. But I think to attune to that vibe, it goes back to what you said earlier, that you have to be more than just in your head. The type of coaches who I train are body-oriented coaches, somatic coaches. And so it's about privileging both the conceptual and the embodied. Not saying one is better than the other, but just recognizing that we, particularly me, which is how I came into it, have switched off some of the embodied stuff because we've privileged the conceptual. And so when I've seen people, many people now come through this program, they come out really transformed because they've discovered something in themselves that they just forgot about, which is this ability to sense. And I've seen it so powerful in organizations where people suddenly go, actually, what am I thinking? Oh, hang on, what am I feeling? Oh, hang on, what am I sensing? And if you can bring in more of that connection, it's really connecting the internal system to itself, then you're building capacity in the wider system. So Daniel Goleman, with his emotional intelligence work, he always said that the more words you have for emotions, the more emotions you can experience. And I think it's the same with sensations. I think it's the same with organizations. I think there's a lack of vocabulary for us to describe all of our experiences.
Yeah.
And you said before, we go back and we say, oh, well, we just need to do this because we've always done it like this, or we need some of that. I think we need to invent some new ways of describing the experience at work, some new forms of experiencing, so that we can move away from just this, how are you doing?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
There's another, and I'm going to ruin this one, but an Argentinian colleague of mine said that they have this great thing where someone says, how are you? And they say, fine, or do you want the truth? And it's like that in organisations.
Yeah.
Sometimes I say, how are you? And I keep walking.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think, hang on, am I looking for an answer or do I just want to be heard?
It's a kind of social ritual that has almost a subconscious delivery and a very almost non-receptive way.
Yeah. I'm still walking as that person's calling after me. Awful.
Gosh, yeah.
Help. And I'm like, okay, thanks. Bye.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Hey folks, Perry Timms here, host of Tomorrow's People. I have to tell you that I'm loving Personio. It's a game changer for HR. With fantastic features and new updates coming all of the time, it keeps your HR work innovative almost on its own. Check them out at personio.com. That's personio.com. I like the idea of the vocabulary giving us a different way to appreciate and then act on some of those senses. And deliberately going down that route, because we've also got this perverse media hype vocabulary coming in, like quiet quitting, great resignation, and I've even heard one recently, hush holidays, where people
hush holidays. What's that?
Apparently it's where you are working remotely and you're kind of on holiday, but you're also logging in and doing work.
Right.
And I'm kind of thinking, so you're doing work then? It's not really a hush holiday, is it? You just change your venue. So we've got that going on in what I think is a less helpful fashion.
Oh, I love it though.
Do you?
I don't think it's helpful, but I love it.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think we're at the edge of something, and if there isn't a word for it, and we have to make up some weird little phrase, it's a way of going, there's something that doesn't fit with how we've always done it, but we haven't quite found the words for it. And so I don't mind those things because I think they're an invitation to say, what do you really mean?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So if you were to say, actually, what you really mean is you're still working, you're just in a cabin.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about how people are working and living? And is it okay that you're working on holiday? So I think these things, they're just ways of us going, how do we make sense of this thing that we don't quite understand? But we know this isn't quite the right word for it, but we'll have to make one up anyway.
Great way of phrasing it. I will become very comfortable with that now, I think.
It's a good curiosity, I think. And it's not, I know that people, and I know I've fallen into the trap, love coming up with a new word or a new phrase because then you go, yeah, I invented that. But equally, I think it's just helpful as a way of going, so what does that mean?
Yeah. Like your workplace whiplash, that invites a whole kind of, wow. So we're talking about collision and damage and there's definitely something in that. I like the invitation, though, for us to create a codified way of expressing certain things in order for us to make them more real, perhaps, that we can then do something with. And I've often found that a real curiosity of mine about OD is about how we make the work that we do real. And I'll use just one cliche here, outside of the flipping org chart. Do you know what I mean? Because it's almost like there are so many people go, oh, what, you mean the org chart? It's like, no. Do you know what I mean? There's so much more to it than that. And is that something you're perhaps being very deliberate about in terms of how people then go from concept and quite complex theory even to what that looks like and is so that it becomes that more real thing?
Yeah. I think for me, it's the most unsexy answer, but it always comes back to contracting.
Okay.
And one of the most common conversations I have with OD people is, how do we demonstrate our value?
Yeah.
How do we show what difference we're making?
Yeah.
And it makes me curious because I think, well, why are you there?
Yeah.
Who's paying you to do something internally or externally? What are you being paid to do? and who's determining what success looks like.
Yeah.
And, I think with the best will in the world, often because we are maybe kind of naturally inclined to be relational and to be in a space of helping, sometimes we'll just throw ourselves at something because it looks like it should be done. OD, I remember being described once as everything the organisation should be doing but isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we fall into that trap of going, well, give it to the OD person because they'll fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we look for metrics. So we look for things like sickness absence or how many leavers we've had or the number of complaints. And then we give it to the person, whoever this person is, who's kind of saying, what difference are you making? And they go, oh, great. So sickness has gone down by 2%. But actually, it's not helping us with our strategic objectives. And so often what we do, I think, is we're in a place where we're trying to be really helpful. We're finding all of this data to back up what we're doing. And maybe what we could be doing as well is having a conversation with the person commissioning us and saying, what does success look like for you? Why am I here? What do you want to be different? So, I'm on a bit of a mission, I think, which is, and this comes from my own poor contracting in the past, to just always be contracting, always be in that space of going, why are we doing this? Who thinks it's going to make a difference? Is someone somewhere feeling stressed about something and they think that by giving it to an OD person, it will solve something? But to be curious and to be compassionate and to be, the thing is often not the thing.
Yeah.
And so to go in with a question rather than a solution.
I love that because that made me loop back to your dynamic OD kind of frame, because there is something about, and I love the question, what difference do you want to see from this? I think there's something really nice about that, because it's almost like at a point you'll go, okay, well, I can see how we can get some of the difference you want, but I can actually see more.
Yeah.
Or see difference. And there's a lovely playback in that, which is like, before we go too far down this line. Yeah. Because I think that sort of regularity of loop, I think, is probably what I'm envisaging. And I suddenly got really excited about the thought of not doing that enough and wanting to do it in my next engagement. Do you know what I mean?
And those loops, they're the things that reveal the patterns in organizations. That's the culture. If something doesn't get repeated, then it's not part of the culture. If it's not consistent, it's not part of the culture. And those loops can either be helpful or unhelpful. And sometimes we need to amplify them and sometimes we need to disrupt them. But if we don't know what they are, then we don't know where to start. And so I think those conversations about going, hang on, let's just pause for a second. Those are the things that, for me, make even more difference than any kind of intervention. The quality of the presence that we show up with is so important compared to even whatever tool we have. If I show up and I go, right, I know what to do here, I'm the expert, I'm going to solve everything, then it's going to go wrong.
And I love an alliteration, and I've got 3 P's in my mind at the moment from what you're talking about, is organizations have a lot of phenomena. And often we will label them as a problem or an issue or an opportunity or whatever, but they're often so very like complex and amorphous and so on. It's almost like it doesn't feel like it's definable quite yet. So therefore it's a bit of a phenomenon. It's a bit of a phenomenon. Let's work that one out. And then I'm picking up patterns that come from that, where you're like, I want to see into this phenomena and even be with it, be part of it. And then the patterns come through. But then the crucial other P you've just given me then is your pause there. There's a loveliness about, I'm in it, I can see more of it, I can even start to create some links. But before I go into diagnostic or development or design or something, I just need to pause with it.
And the pause with it for me often happens when I immerse myself in some data. So if someone says, here's a thing we need to change, the pause for me is to say, show me the data. Where's the data that supports your idea? Where's the data that contradicts it? Are we spending too much time looking at a particular kind of data and ignoring lots of other stuff? And to really be immersed in that, because then that can shift something. Because the person who says, we need to change the culture. My first question would be, what, everyone, everywhere, doing everything, all at the same time? And of course it's not. No. So then you go, okay, where's the data that says some of the organization needs to change some of what it's doing? And how do we know? And what do they need to change? And how do we know? And so the pause, I think, is a really good place to get curious, to sit in that space of not knowing, or at least to sit in a space of going, we have all the data, now let's see what the people who own the data make of it. We won't even make the assumption. We'll give it to them and say, this is your data. What's it telling us?
I love that realization that there are things you now know you don't know and what to do about those. And you're absolutely right about the data. And the thing I love about the data is that we often just have in our mind an image of a spreadsheet again, a massive report. But actually it's all those other things, isn't it? The rituals, the habits, the descriptors and all those multitudes of things. And I love the way you just go, what, all of it, everywhere, all the time. That's just such a lovely response to dive into a little bit more. So I think you gave us a little bit of the diagnostic and dialogic OD within just that simple small exchange. So 3D OD is what's coming through, and that's lovely, because I'm always looking for things that can sort of popularize OD, if you know what I mean.
Why?
I don't know, because I just think it's such a dark secret to many. It's almost like, I don't know enough about it, when actually they do. Or people are almost deliberately a bit obtuse, going, oh, that's just for them. And it's like, oh, is it? I don't know. And then I sometimes see OD people who like the elitism of it and don't want to let it go over ground or something. And I'm like, no, I want everybody to know it and be it and do it. But that's just me.
I agree to an extent. I think it's, so where am I coming from with this? I think there's something in the language of it that people understand the word organization and they understand the word development. And so they go, oh, we are all doing this.
Yeah.
I think everyone can develop an organization in some way, whether it's through doing a good appraisal, whether it's through being a really responsive manager, whether it's being a member of staff who goes to a network meeting to help someone work on a problem. All of those things are helping to develop the organization. And so in that respect, everyone is doing a bit of OD. And then there are other things where I think particularly managers or leaders maybe undervalue their own abilities and strengths.
Yeah.
And would bring in an OD person maybe to do some team building or some kind of diagnostic. What I'm noticing, and what's actually really encouraging, is that if I do go into those teams, often this is when the agenda gets thrown out the window and I say, actually, let's do it differently so that you can be better at it yourself. You don't need me to do it. I can show you how to do it. And so then you leave the system in a better place, and those managers can be their own developers. And then there's other things where I think there is complexity and there is maybe an ambiguity or a lack of solution. And that's where I think you bring in an OD specialist. I don't think it's about being exclusive or elitist. I think there's something about recognizing that we are professionals. I think within that, there is sometimes a fear of our own expertise. And I've seen too many people, sadly, who will introduce themselves and say, oh, I'm the OD person, but I don't really know what that is. And I think, shh, don't say that. Go and learn it. It's fine. And so there's room for everything. There's room for all of that. But in the way that, I used to say in the NHS, I have compassion, but that doesn't make me a nurse. I have a brain, but it doesn't make me a brain surgeon. Everyone can develop their organizations, but not everyone can do OD.
What a lovely phrase. And then inviting those who do, in the professional sense, to learn their way into that.
Exactly.
Lovely.
And we have a really, in some ways, a brilliantly low bar of entry into the field. We're really inclusive. And that's brilliant. But I think once we're in that space, there's a responsibility for us to develop ourselves, to know our craft, know our profession, understand the language and the theories and the models and the practice and the impact of self. Otherwise, I think there's an ethical issue we can't just go in and expect people to work in what can be quite a demanding space or a place of trust if we haven't done the work on ourselves.
Nice.
So it's always both. I think there's room for inclusion, there's room for people coming and learning, and as professionals we have to be professional.
We can all learn how to make a clay pot, but that doesn't mean to say we're going to stock the shelves of Habitat with our products, really.
Exactly. And another thing that I love, Grayson Perry, when people are saying to him, you know, how do you do what you do? He says, I can teach you how to make my last pot, but I can't teach you how to make my next one.
Ooh.
And that's, for me, that really inspired the idea of dynamic OD. You know, I could train someone to be an OD person, but I can't train them in what I'm going to do next.
Oh, that's so nice.
And so to be at the edge of our expertise and to be constantly kind of pushing ourselves to go, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And isn't that exciting? Rather than, oh, that's terrifying. Oh no, I need an answer. But to hold our nerve and to be in that space of going, it's okay, I've got this.
Love it. Oh, that's got me thinking so much about the fact that this podcast is called Tomorrow's People. And really, if anything, you've just reminded me how important OD is in creating the way that people of tomorrow come to life and thrive and all that kind of thing. Oh, what a lovely loop. Paul, before we call it quits on this, and it could go on forever, anything else you want to add?
So I did bring something with me. I brought this book of poetry called The House of Belonging by David White. Because it goes back to, I think, some of the things that we were talking about, even though I didn't know we were going to talk about them, which was about vocabulary and language. Because there's a poem that he writes called This Life. And just one sentence of it, which I just love. He says, the dark penumbra of my belonging. Ooh. And I didn't know what that meant. I had to look it up. And penumbra means a space in between full illumination and full shadow.
Oh.
Somewhere in between. And I think that's where OD sits. I think we are in this penumbra of an organisation where we're not there in the middle making change happen. We're not there leading it. But we're also not just sitting on the sidelines waiting for it to happen. And I loved the richness of that sentence about the penumbra of belonging, because it makes me think, as an OD person, where do I belong? And I belong in all of those spaces. And it's knowing, when do I step into the light? When do I step back into the shadows? How does it feel if I'm in the dark too long? What does it feel like if I'm on full beam? You know, I just think it's a really lovely image to think about in terms of how I show up. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I think for those people who are versed in the field, I can imagine they'll be like, yes, I've been looking for that forever.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful find. And something about the artisticness of where it sits in that book of poetry, but what it means in a professional sense. There's something lovely in that, almost as a metaphor for what OD often is.
Yeah, because the science of it is out there. You know, there's 70 years of stuff that we can look at. There is no shortage of places. And I find the art of it when I read poetry, or when I go to the theatre, or when I go to a Beyonce concert. You know, I'm in a way, it's like I feel like sometimes I wish I could stop working, but I will be in those spaces and I think, oh, how can OD be more like this?
I know.
How can we be more Bjork today? How can we be more Marina Abramovich today? Because that's where I get the inspiration. The science part is really useful, but the artistry of it is the thing that gets me really excited.
Lovely. What a great note to finish on. And podcasting, I guess, is a mixture of those, but this one certainly was. So, wow. I guess I didn't know what to expect, except I would find it joyous, and it's been joyous. So, Paul Taylor-Pitt, thank you.
Thank you
for being on Tomorrow's People. And we will be diving more into poetry and science. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Tomorrow's People, please subscribe and check out our previous episodes from wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want to transform your people processes, head to personio.com.